Hey guys, Dustin here. Welcome to another episode of Horroritis. This video was scheduled to go later on in the month, but in light of recent events, it got bumped up to this week. So let's get to it. A Nightmare on Elm Street, written and directed by Wes Craven, starring Heather Langenkamp, Johnny Depp, and Robert Englund, wasn't the first slasher movie to hit the screen in the 80s. It did, however, spawn one of the most recognizable horror movie villains ever. Now, if you don't know Freddy Krueger, and some people don't, this video should serve as an introduction to one of my favorite slashers of all time. So let's jump right in. When the movie opens, we see a pair of hands working away in what seems to be a boiler room. At the end of the sequence, we see that the finished product is actually the iconic Freddy glove. But since this is the first movie, we don't know that yet. We see Tina, in her nightgown, running through dark and wet hallways that are oddly enough inhabited by one lone sheep. We never see this sheep again, and I heard his acting career fell through, and he's now bussing tables in Topeka. Tina eventually makes her way to the boiler room, where she's attacked by a man wearing a glove with knives on the fingers. When she wakes up, her nightgown is slashed. The next day at school, Tina learns that her friends Nancy, Glenn, and Rod have also been having nightmares, even though Glenn and Rod don't really admit to it. That night, Glenn and Nancy decide to stay over at Tina's house to keep her company while her mom's out of town. Tina describes the man from her dream to Nancy, and Nancy confides in her that she's been having the same dreams.
Actually, they were more like finger knives or something he'd made himself. But they made a horrible sound. It was like, scream.
Nancy, you dreamed about the same creep I did.
They hear a noise coming from outside, and Glenn, obviously the hero type, goes to check it out. Rod jumps out of the darkness and tackles him, and has a big laugh with everybody and admits that it was him making the noise and he was just messing with them.
You see his face? You see his face?
He says that he and Tina are going to take Tina's mom's room and Glenn and Nancy can have the rest of the house for the night. Tina wakes up in the middle of the night to the sound of stones hitting her window. Now, she's looking out the window, she doesn't see anybody, but another stone hits the window and cracks it. As she's inspecting the crack, she hears a voice calling her name. So she does what everybody in horror movies do, and she goes outside to check it out. Alone. At night. She ends up in the alley behind her house where she's confronted with the man from her dreams. He chases her back to her house where he attacks her. We learn then that she's actually still dreaming, and her screaming and flailing wake up Rod. So he jumps out of bed, pulls the blankets off of her, and we see her shirt rip open and 4 gashes just appear on her chest. At that point, she levitates, spins around a few times, and hits Rod, knocking him into a lamp. Then she's flung into the corner, and then as if by some invisible force, she's dragged up the wall and across the ceiling until she falls down onto the bed dead. By the time Nancy and Glenn can bust open the door, Rod is gone. This gets us pretty close to the 20-minute mark of the movie, so most people know Freddy as the wisecracking bad guy who dispatches his victims in inventive and often comical ways. But in the beginning, Freddy was actually supposed to be the strong silent killer type. In fact, the character of Fred Krueger was originally set to be played by a stuntman. However, when they got to filming, they realized that they actually needed an actor. At that point, they got Robert Englund, who came in and gave Freddy his personality, even in this movie where he spends most of the time hidden in the shadows. Another big change in this movie was that they changed Freddy's character from a child rapist to a child murderer. And sure, it was really only just a change in one person's lines, but the impact was huge. Sure, one isn't any better than the other, but had they left it the way it originally was, I don't think the character of Freddy would have blown up the way he did. You wouldn't see him on any t-shirts. You wouldn't see anybody dressing up as him for horror cons. he wouldn't have had his own spin-off TV series in the 80s, and he sure as hell wouldn't have had his own 900 number in the 90s.
Test your nightmare knowledge. Dial 1-900-860-4FRED. See if you survive Freddy's boiler room.
For some reason, changing that one word in one person's dialogue made us love him. It's probably because we've all been to the grocery store and we've seen that one kid. You know the one I'm talking about. The thing that stands out about this movie is you can never really tell what's real and what's a dream. And the movies that come after it all try to do this, but they all seem to fall short. They can never quite duplicate what the first movie does. Things jump between dream and reality all the time in this movie, and at some points they even overlap. This causes me to believe that maybe the entire movie is actually somebody's dream. Nancy's dream, to be specific. Okay. Put on your tinfoil hats. Follow me on this one. I've got a theory. Right before Tina dies, as she's checking out the crack in the window, we see Freddy checking out Nancy, kind of looming over her before he kills her best friend. But she doesn't know this, and we kind of forget about it. When Nancy falls asleep at school, she follows Tina's corpse through the halls and eventually ends up in the boiler room. Now, this is the same boiler room from Tina's dream, and we're supposed to assume the same boiler room from the very first scene at the beginning of the movie.
Tina?
Now, later on in the movie series, we learn that Freddy controls the dreamscape. However, in this movie, we don't know that, and all the movies that come after, except for one, were directed by different people, so the vision changes from movie to movie. So we either assume that Freddy's in control, or both girls have an intricate knowledge of the school's boiler room, which seems unlikely. But if we're taking into account information from movies that come after, we learn in the second movie that the boiler room, this very boiler room, isn't even located at the school. So we assume that Freddy is in control of the dreamscape. But I still say no. Aside from a few mentions early on in the movie, nobody, except for Nancy, especially after Tina's dead, is having nightmares. In fact, after Tina dies, the whole movie becomes pretty Nancy-centric. It's like Freddy spends the entire movie following Nancy and taking away the things she loves right before he takes her. In the bath scene, right before Freddy pulls Nancy under, she already knows the Freddy song.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Now, at this point in the movie, she doesn't know who Freddy is or what he does, and she hasn't even seen the creepy jump rope kids yet. Later on in the movie, where Nancy goes into her own dream, she asks Glenn to watch over her and wake her up if she looks like she's having a nightmare. Now, in her dream, she asks Glenn if he's still watching. He pops out of a bush and says that he is.
Glenn? Are you still watching?
Yeah, so?
I'm just checking.
Now, this is the first time in the movie where reality and dream actually come together. I mean, unless Glenn fell asleep and is having a shared dream experience with Nancy, there's no way that he could be there. But we learned that he actually did fall asleep, therefore the shared dream theory is actually possible. But how did we know he fell asleep? After Nancy visits the jail in her dream and sees Freddy in Rod's cell, he chases her back to her house, where she gets home, runs up the goopy stairs, makes it to her room, where she sees Glenn sleeping in the chair by her bed. So in her dream, she's seeing events that are happening in real life. And she's not just seeing the events, she's actually in the room with Glenn. And after she wakes up, her and Glenn go to the jail to check on Rod, but by the time they get there, he's already dead. Later on, we learn that Nancy can actually pull things out of her dreams. Now, this is a skill that only Nancy has. Although, we only see interactions with Freddy from Nancy's point of view, so we don't really know if anybody's even tried that yet.
I brought something out from my dream.
After that, Nancy's mom explains to her who Fred Krueger was, what he did, and how she came to have his glove. Because out of everybody involved in killing Freddy, it was only Nancy's parents who got the evidence of the crime. Right before Glenn dies, Freddy calls Nancy and tongues her through the phone.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
Now this is a phone she's already ripped out of the wall, because that's where we used to keep phones, plugged into the wall. You can check Google, it's true. Keep in mind here that Nancy's awake. It's Glenn that's dreaming. So now Freddy is manipulating Nancy's reality through Glenn's dream. That is, if we assume that Nancy's actually awake. Glenn's death is another example of Freddy manipulating reality. Only this time it's Glenn's parents' reality. Now, when Glenn dies, he gets sucked into his bed and something like 500 gallons of blood come out and spray across the ceiling. Now, Tina's upside down room effect actually had a more appropriate amount of blood, and therefore we can accept that. But Glenn's death is a bit too much. I mean, this scene had more blood than a Guar concert. And to further push the boundaries, Glenn's mother walks in and sees all this blood spewing from an inexplicable void in her son's bed. When Nancy's finally able to pull Freddy from her dream, she leads him on a chase through her house where she set up a series of booby traps, and Freddy falls for each and every one. Here, she set herself up to be smarter than the guy who can manipulate dreams and sometimes reality. She's put herself in an unlikely hero role, which is kind of like what kids do when they fantasize or daydream. Freddy changes reality again when he kills Nancy's mother, and this time Nancy's father's there to witness it. When Nancy walks outside at the end, her mother's alive, her friends are alive, and all is right with the world. That is until Freddy takes over the car she's riding in and whisks her and her friends away to certain death.
What's going on? Hey, I'm not doing it.
And then Nancy's mom gets re-killed. To me, this shows that the entire movie was actually Nancy's dream the entire time, even though at the end we learn she was never really in control of it. Now, Nancy does come back in the third movie, and they never really offer any explanation as to what happened at the end of the first movie. All we know is that she's alive and Freddy is pissed. This indicates that whatever happened after Glenn's car sped off at the end, Nancy somehow survived and eventually woke up. This movie is an absolute classic. If you're going to watch any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, you have to start with this one. After this one, jump around all you want, but this one is a must. I cannot recommend this movie enough to anybody who's new to either the Freddy series or horror in general. This is a must-see. If you haven't seen it, you have to watch it now. I'm serious. If you have seen it, go back and watch it again because it never gets old. So that's it for this video. As always, if you liked it, hit that like button, share it around with your friends. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button because I've got more videos coming for you. If you want to get a hold of me personally, you can do that in the comments below, or you can get me at Facebook and Twitter, both at The Horroritis. Now, if you want to support this channel and help it grow, you can go to my Patreon link, which is patreon.com/horroritis. There you can donate as little as $1 up to any amount you want for any period of time you want. It's completely up to you. And if you don't feel like donating, I completely understand. We're still cool. So until next time, I'm Dustin. This was Horroritis. Thanks for watching.